Work. I'd been staying at the Holiday Inn with my girlfriend, honestly the most beautiful woman I'd ever known, for 3 days under a phony name, shooting heroin. We made love in the bed, ate steaks at the restaurant, shot up in the John, puked, cried, accused one another, begged of one another, forgave, promised, and carried one another to heaven. But there was a fight. I stood outside the motel hitchhiking, dressed up in a hurry, shirtless under my jacket, with the wind crying through my earring. A bus came. I climbed aboard and sat on the plastic seat while the things of our city turned in the windows like the images in a slot machine. Once, as we stood arguing at a street corner, I punched her in the stomach. She doubled over and broke down crying. A car full of young college men stopped beside us. "She's feeling sick," I told them. "Bullshit," one of them said. "You elbowed her right in the gut." He did, he did," she said, weeping. I don't remember what I said to them. I remember loneliness crushing first my lungs, then my heart, then my balls. They put her in the car with them and drove away. But she came back. This morning, after the fight, after sitting on the bus for several blocks with a thoughtless, red mind, I jumped down and walked into the Vine. The Vine was still and cold. Wayne was the only customer. His hands were shaking. He couldn't lift his glass. I put my left hand on Wayne's shoulder, and with my right, opiated and steady, I brought his shot of bourbon to his lips. "How would you feel about making some money?" he asked me. "I was just going to go over here in the corner and nod out," I informed him. "I decided," he said, "in my mind, to make some money." "So what?" I said. "Come with me," he begged. "You mean you need a ride?" "I have the tools," he said. "All we need is that sorry-ass car of yours to get around in." We found my $60 Chevrolet, the finest and best thing I ever bought, considering the price, in the streets near my apartment. I liked that car. It was the kind of thing you could bang into a phone pole with, and nothing would happen at all. Wayne cradled his burlap sack of tools in his lap as we drove out of town to where the fields bunched up into hills and then dipped down toward a cool river mothered by benevolent clouds. All the houses on the riverbank, a dozen or so, were abandoned. The same company, you could tell, had built them all and then painted them 4 different colors. The windows in the lower stories were empty of glass. We passed alongside them, and I saw that the ground floors of these buildings were covered with silt. Some time back, a flood had run over the banks, cancelling everything. But now the river was flat and slow. Willows stroked the waters with their hair. "Are we doing a burglary?" I asked Wayne. "You can't burglate a forgotten empty house," he said, horrified at my stupidity. I didn't say anything. "This is a salvage job," he said. "Pull up to that one, right about there." The house we parked in front of just had a terrible feeling about it. I knocked. "Don't do that," Wayne said. "It's stupid." Inside, our feet kicked up the silt the river had left there. The watermark wandered the walls of the downstairs about 3 feet above the floor. Straight, stiff grass lay all over the place in bunches, as if someone had stretched them there to dry. Wayne used a pry bar, and I had a shiny hammer with a blue rubber grip. We put the pry points in the seams of the wall and started tearing away the sheetrock. It came loose with a noise like old men coughing. Whenever we exposed some of the writing in its white plastic jacket, we ripped it free of its connections, pulled it out, and bunched it up. That's what we were after. We intended to sell the copper wire for scrap. By the time we were on the 2nd floor, I could see we were going to make some money, but I was getting tired. I dropped the hammer, went to the bathroom. I was sweaty and thirsty, but of course the water didn't work. I went back to Wayne, standing in one of 2 small empty bedrooms, and started dancing around and pounding the walls, breaking through the sheetrock and making a giant racket, until the hammer got stuck. Wayne ignored this misbehavior. I was catching my breath. I asked him, "Who owned these houses, do you think?" He stopped doing anything. "This is my house." "It is?" "It was." He gave the wire a long, smooth yank, a gesture full of the serenity of hatred, popping its staples and freeing it into the room. We balled up big gobs of wire in the center of each room, working for over an hour. I boosted Wayne through the trapdoor into the attic, and he pulled me up after him, both of us sweating and our pores leaking the poisons of drink, which smelled like old citrus peelings. And we made a mound of white-jacketed wire in the top of his former home, pulling it up out of the floor. I felt weak. I had to vomit in the corner, just a thimbleful of grey bile. All this work, I complained, is fucking with my high. Can't you figure out some easier way of making $1? Wayne went to the window. He rapped it several times with his pry bar, each time harder, until it was loudly destroyed. We threw the stuff out there onto the mud-flattened meadow that came right up below us from the river. It was quiet in this strange neighborhood, along the bank, except for the steady breeze and the young leaves. But now we heard a boat coming upstream. The sound curlicued through the riverside saplings like a bee, and in a minute a flat-nosed sports boat cut up the middle of the river, going 30 or 40 at least. This boat was pulling behind itself a tremendous triangular kite on a rope. From the kite, up in the air 100 feet or so, a woman was suspended, belted in somehow, I would have guessed. She had long red hair. She was delicate and white, and naked except for her beautiful hair. I don't know what she was thinking as she floated past these ruins. "What's she doing?" was all I could say, though we could see that she was flying. "Now, that is a beautiful sight," Wayne said. On the way to town, Wayne asked me to make a long detour onto the old highway. He had me pull up to a lopsided farmhouse set on a hill of grass. "I'm not going in but for 2 seconds," he said. "You want to come in?" "Who's here?" I said. "Come and see," he told me. It didn't seem anyone was home when we climbed the porch and he knocked. But he didn't knock again, and after a full 3 minutes a woman opened the door, a slender redhead in a dress printed with small blossoms. She didn't smile. "Hi," was all she said to us. "Can we come in?" Wayne asked. "Let me come onto the porch," she said, and walked past us to stand looking out over the fields. I waited at the other end of the porch, leaning against the rail, and didn't listen. I don't know what they said to one another. She walked down the steps, and Wayne followed. He stood hugging himself and talking down at the earth. The wind lifted and dropped her long red hair. She was about 40, with a bloodless, waterlogged beauty. I guessed Wayne was the storm that had stranded her here. In a minute she said to me, "Come on." He got in the driver's seat and started the car. You didn't need a key to start it. I came down the steps and got in beside him. He looked at her through the windshield. She hadn't gone back inside yet, or done anything at all. "That's my wife," he told me, as if it wasn't obvious. I turned around in the seat and studied Wayne's wife as we drove off. What word can be uttered about those fields? She stood in the middle of them as on a high mountain, with her red hair pulled out sideways by the wind. Around her the green and grey plains pressed down flat, and all the grasses of Iowa whistling one note. I knew who she was. "That was her, wasn't it?" I said. Wayne was speechless. There was no doubt in my mind. She was the woman we'd seen flying over the river. As nearly as I could tell, I'd wandered into some sort of dream that Wayne was having about his wife and his house. But I didn't say anything more about it. Because after all, in small ways, it was turning out to be one of the best days of my life, whether it was somebody else's dream or not. We turned in the scrap wire for $28 each at a salvage yard near the gleaming tracks at the edge of town, and went back to the Vine. Who should be pouring drinks there but a young woman whose name I can't remember, but I remember the way she poured. It was like doubling your money. She wasn't going to make her employers rich. Needless to say, she was revered among us. "I'm buying," I said. "No way in hell," Wayne said. "Come on." "It is," Wayne said, "my sacrifice." Sacrifice? Where had he gotten a word like sacrifice? Certainly I had never heard of it. I'd seen Wayne look across the poker table in a bar and accuse I do not exaggerate, the biggest, blackest man in Iowa of cheating, accuse him for no other reason than that he, Wayne, was a bit irked by the run of the cards. That was my idea of sacrifice, tossing yourself away, discarding your body. The black man stood up and circled the neck of a beer bottle with his fingers. He was taller than anyone who had ever entered that barroom. "Step outside," Wayne said. And the man said, "This ain't school." "What the goddamn fucking piss hell," Wayne said, "is that supposed to mean? I ain't stepping outside like you do at school. Make your try right here and now." "This ain't a place for our kind of business," Wayne said. "Not inside here with women and children and dogs and cripples." "Shit," the man said. "You're just drunk." "I don't care," Wayne said. "To me, you don't make no more noise than a fart in a paper bag." The huge, murderous man said nothing. "I'm going to sit down now," Wayne said, "and I'm going to play my game and fuck you." The man shook his head. He sat down too. This was an amazing thing. By reaching out one hand and taking hold of it for 2 or 3 seconds, he could have popped Wayne's head like an egg. And then came one of those moments. I remember living through one when I was 18 and spending the afternoon in bed with my first wife before we were married. Our naked bodies started glowing, and the air turned such a strange color I thought my life must be leaving me, and with every young fiber and cell I wanted to hold onto it for another breath. A clattering sound was tearing up my head as I staggered upright and opened the door on a vision I will never see again. Where are my women now, with their sweet, wet words and ways, and the miraculous balls of hail popping in a green translucence in the yards? We put on our clothes, she and I, and walked out into a town flooded ankle-deep with white, buoyant stones. Birth should have been like that. That moment in the bar, after the fight was narrowly averted, was like the green silence after the hailstorm. Somebody was buying a round of drinks. The cards were scattered on the table, face up, face down, and they seemed to foretell that whatever we did to one another would be washed away by liquor or explained away by sad songs. Wayne was a part of all that. The vine was like a railroad club car that had somehow run itself off the tracks into a swamp of time where it awaited the blows of the wrecking ball. And the blows really were coming. Because of urban renewal, they were tearing up and throwing away the whole downtown. And here we were this afternoon with nearly $30 each, and our very favorite person tending bar. I wish I could remember her name, but I remember only her grace and her generosity. All the really good times happened when Wayne was around, but this afternoon, somehow, was the best of all those times. We had money. We were grimy and tired. Usually we felt guilty and frightened because there was something wrong with us and we didn't know what it was. But today we had the feeling of men who had worked. The vine had no jukebox, but a real stereo continually playing tunes of alcoholic self-pity and sentimental divorce. "Nurse," I sobbed. She poured doubles like an angel, right up to the lip of a cocktail glass. No measuring. "You have a lovely pitching arm." You had to go down to them like a hummingbird over a blossom. I saw her much later, not too many years ago, and when I smiled, she seemed to believe I was making advances. But it was only that I remembered. "I'll never forget you. Your husband will beat you with an extension cord, and the bus will pull away, leaving you standing there in tears. But you were my mother."